Next on Current News, the tensions between Catholics and the Chinese Communist government are taking a new twist. The Vatican is calling on Beijing to stop intimidation. A Texas bishop personally escorts migrants across the U.S.-Mexican border, the latest in the escalating immigration crisis. In our special coverage of Religious Freedom Week, how security experts are working to keep the faithful safe. Plus, a Catholic Mass in a Greenwich Village park is celebrated on a special anniversary for the LGBT community. The news starts right now. Good evening, I'm Michelle Powers. The tense relationship between the Chinese Communist government and the Vatican is becoming more complicated tonight. The church is telling Beijing to end the intimidation of Catholics loyal to the Pope. Melissa BUTZ has the latest from St. Peter's Square.
Nearly a year after the Vatican signed a provisional agreement with China to be able to nominate bishops, they now have released a pastoral document specifying regulations for how clergy should be registered with the Chinese civil authorities. The Holy See has asked China to end intimidatory pressures on Catholic clergy who are not recognized by the Chinese state but are in full communion with Rome. Beijing obliges priests to register themselves civilly in the country. The problem is that the document they must sign obliges the priest to accept the principle of independence, autonomy, and self-administration of the church in China. The Holy See says autonomy should mean the normal autonomy of each diocese. This should not be interpreted as a separation of the Pope and the Universal Church. If this document does not state this, the Holy See proposes that bishops and priests write in a sentence themselves explaining this. If this is not possible, they must at least be able to verbally pronounce it in the presence of a witness. Despite the agreement signed by the Vatican and China in September 2018, relations remain delicate. There's still a long way to go before the normalization of relations. While not all Chinese Catholics are in favor of closer relations with the Vatican, this document is pushing the fundamental principles of ecclesiastical communion in hopes of one day eventually having full unity between the Vatican and China. At the Vatican, Melissa BUTZ, Current News.
The latest tonight in the escalating immigration crisis. El Paso Bishop Mark Seitz personally escorting a group of migrants back into Mexico. They are seeking asylum in the United States but are prevented from staying in Texas. The bishop calls that an affront to human rights and dignity. The cleric then made a return journey back to the U.S. with 7 more migrants who are hoping for asylum. The Supreme Court will decide the fate of the Dreamers, hundreds of thousands of undocumented immigrants who came to the United States as kids. The justices announcing this morning they'll take up the case next term. At the heart of the dispute is President Trump's decision to terminate DACA, the Obama program that shields Dreamers from deportation. President Trump and other world leaders are in Japan at this hour. They're at the economic summit known as the G20. Omar Jimenez reports when President Trump was meeting with Vladimir Putin, election meddling came up.
A lighthearted tone from President Trump during his meeting with Vladimir Putin, the first meeting between the two leaders since Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation concluded the Russians interfered in the 2016 presidential election in a, quote, sweeping and systematic fashion. The conversation comes as part of the G20 summit in Osaka, Japan, bringing together leaders from across the world.
Thank you very much, Angela.
On day one, President Trump meeting with the leaders of Germany, India, and Japan. Day 2, President Trump meets with Saudi Arabia. Last week, a United Nations report said there's evidence Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman bears responsibility for the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The two are expected to discuss escalating tensions with Iran. Another meeting will be with President Xi Jinping of China, after President Trump banned federal agencies from doing business with Chinese tech giant Huawei, and in the midst of what has been an ever-escalating trade war.
Who knows, but I think it'll be productive. At a minimum, it will be productive. We'll see what happens and what comes out of it.
In Washington, Omar Jimenez, Current News.
Hundreds of Catholics coming to a Greenwich Village park for Mass, the liturgy being celebrated on a day that is important in the history of the modern LGBT movement. Current News' Emily Drewby reports.
On Wednesday night, a park outside a tavern became a gathering place to pray. Not just any tavern, the Stonewall Inn, the so-called birthplace of the gay rights movement.
It's just really special to be out here in the open and in an affirming, sort of open, loving environment.
Megan McKeever is a member of Out at St. Paul, the LGBT ministry of the Mother Church of the Paulist Fathers, St. Paul the Apostle in Manhattan. Members of the ministry planned this outdoor mass. The group is not affiliated with the Archdiocese of New York. The Holy Mass comes on a special anniversary, 50 years to the date of the Stonewall riots, when members of the LGBT community led a series of demonstrations against an excessive and violent police raid. For Megan, this Mass is a way of combining two parts of her life, faith and her sexuality.
I'm a cradle Catholic, so it was something that, I was born with and I was blessed to be born with. It's a foundation for me and it roots me anywhere I am.
The church teaches that marriage is only between a man and a woman. At the same time, the Catechism teaches that LGBT people must be, quote, accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. Recently, more churches have been trying to reach out to all the people they minister to, and that includes the LGBT community.
Se una persona è gay e cerca il Signore e ha buona volontà, ma chi sono io per giudicarla?
For the gay community, this comment from Pope Francis aboard the papal plane on his way back from a trip to Brazil in 2013 seemed to echo around the world. It was made in the context of Pope Francis suggesting that he would not judge priests for their sexual orientation. This made many hopeful for inclusivity, a hope that perpetuates through Greenwich Village today. Some here believe that there has been a shift for Catholics who identify as LGBT, but still many members of clergy are holding fast to church teachings. Bishop Thomas Tobin of Providence, Rhode Island, tweeting this out ahead of Pride Month, asking Catholics to not support LGBTQ events, saying they, quote, promote a culture and encourage activities that are contrary to Catholic faith and morals. They are especially harmful for children. An idea backed in a recently released Vatican document on gender ideology, urging Catholic educators to teach that biological sex and gender are naturally fixed at birth and part of God's plan for creation. Another recent incident in Indianapolis, the Archbishop defending his decision to require their Catholic schools fire gay teachers on the basis of them not following church doctrine, adding they addressed it because it came to their attention.
That's when we address it, but we're trying to address how to reconcile it in order to go forward. There comes moments, however, when we can only accompany people so far before some sad, hard decisions have to be made.
I am here.
Still, what matters here in front of the Stonewall Inn is this moment of unity and faith.
You could just feel the energy. You could definitely feel the Holy Spirit just passing through and bonding us. And his words to us, love, fidelity, acceptance. I mean, that's powerful.
It's a stark difference from what happened on that early morning fight, June 28, 1969. In Manhattan, Emily Druby, Currents News.
There's a lot more news headed your way as we are highlighting some of our most memorable stories recently reported by our Currents News team. Keeping people of faith safe at a time when attacks against houses of worship are becoming more frequent. The troubling rise in anti-Semitism. Both stories part of our Religious Freedom Week coverage. Bishop DiMarzio will be here talking about the Pope's big Amazon summit that involves the lung of the world and the possibility of married priests. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. This is Religious Freedom Week in the United States, spotlighting the dangers facing people of faith. We're taking another look at stories recently reported by the Currents News team. Tim Harfman tells us that religious leaders and Homeland Security experts are going on the offense against threats facing believers.
An all too familiar scene for modern day worshipers. Attack after attack around the world at the hands of terrorists. 2019 is the bloodiest year yet for believers.
This is the world we live in, folks.
At Pace University Wednesday, religious leaders and law enforcement officials are tackling the issue head-on, discussing recent attacks and ways of preventing future terror. William SWEENEY is the assistant director for the FBI's New York office.
People should understand that everybody has safety as a priority, but to maintain awareness of your surroundings, just like you would if you were walking on any street in any county, any state, any city.
He says having cameras and alarms isn't enough. Houses of worship need protocols in place to prevent attacks.
Do you know what your exit plan is? Do you know what the exits look like? Do you know what the inside of the building looks like? Have ushers talked with each other about a plan? Have ushers talked with the pastors, the monsignors, the priests?
For Alan Hausman, acts of terror hit home. He worships at Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. It was October 27, 2018, when a gunman opened fire, killing 11 innocent people.
It was almost unbelievable to even think that in our small little synagogue this could happen.
They're watching in disbelief as mass shootings and bombings continue around the world.
When the other attacks we read about occur, it's almost like it takes people right back to that day.
For Alan, the Pittsburgh shooting has taken a toll on him personally.
I have good days and bad days, good hours and bad hours. Be honest with you, I still don't sleep well most evenings. My mind's still running a million miles an hour.
But he has faith and is helping the Tree of Life Synagogue to have a plan in place.
One of our members that was killed was our greeter usher, and so it's my personal commitment to take his place and be there at the door to greet everybody.
Mr. SWEENEY says worshipers shouldn't be afraid either, but they must be prepared.
Be aware of your surroundings and have a plan.
In Lower Manhattan, Tim Harfman, Currents News.
Communities across America are seeing a very disturbing trend of anti-Jewish violence. Many of the attacks right here in the Diocese of Brooklyn. A new report shows assaults against Jewish people more than doubled last year. An Orthodox Jew beaten in the streets of Brooklyn, another sucker punched in New York. In Los Angeles, a driver screaming disturbing hate speech. And exactly 6 months apart, shooters attacking American synagogues during services with the intent to kill. Pittsburgh last October, 11 lives lost in the worst act of anti-Semitic violence in American history. Poway in April, killing one worshiper. The direct threat against American Jews as victims of vandalism, assault, and even murder is at alarming levels.
We're talking some of the highest numbers of incidents that we've ever seen. It's really kind of unfolded itself in a very ugly way.
For a third year in a row, the Anti-Defamation League says anti-Semitic incidents in America rose to near historic highs. Each of the 1,879 dots, a physical manifestation of hate in 2018.
The threat environment today is one that we haven't seen in this country in recent memory.
George SELIM oversees the ADL Center for Extremism. He says the threat is homegrown and overwhelmingly far-right and white.
There's this concept within white supremacist circles of accelerationism. That means that individuals feel like the white race is in danger and they need to act now.
The evidence of the growing threat is plain to see. Synagogues now pockmarked with bullet holes.
I was centimeters away from death. I still feel the power of the bullets flying.
Rabbi YISROEL Goldstein came to Poway, California in the 1980s with a dream to build a safe oasis for the Jewish community. The 19-year-old white male suspect wrote of killing Jews in an open letter before the attack. I feel no remorse. I only wish I killed more. He said his inspiration came from the slaughter of 50 Muslims at 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, and the massacre of 11 Jews at a synagogue in Pittsburgh, both of which police say were perpetrated by white supremacists. According to the Anti-Defamation League, anti-Semitism is rampant across the country, with 46 of the nation's states experiencing attacks in the last year. Pope Francis is calling on the world's bishops to the Vatican for a synod on the Amazon. The goal of the gathering is to evangelize the faith in the region, and it's also raising the possibility of ordaining married priests. Bishop DiMarzio is with Ed Wilkinson for more on the meeting. Ed.
Thank you, and Bishop DiMarzio is with us today. We're going to talk about the upcoming Vatican Synod on Amazonia. Bishop, a lot of people might not know what Amazonia is all about, and we think, why are we having a synod on a rainforest? Why is this so important and on the Holy Father's mind?
Amazonia really is a region that a lot of Brazil, but also Ecuador, all the countries surrounding the Amazon basin. You know, the Amazon is the biggest river in the world, longest, carries all that water, and also is the lung of the planet because of the vegetation that produces the oxygen that we need. So it's looking at the Amazon and preserving it as a place where the nature can thrive and we can keep the planet alive. But at the same time, it's a place where the faith has to be propagated. As you know, they still have once in a while find these tribes that had no contact with the civilization whatsoever. It's so big, people are hidden in there. That's less and less happening. But how do you deal with these indigenous people? Basically, it's difficult. How do you convert them to the faith? How do they understand? Who's going to minister to them? You know, Brazil is 100 million people, and mostly Catholic. So that's a big, one of the biggest, actually, maybe, I think, the most biggest Catholic country in the world. And there a lack of priests. When I was Bishop of Camden, one time there were 16 priests from our diocese of Camden in Brazil working for the African. One even became a bishop in the diocese, but then they aged out. By the time I got there, there was just a few left. But I did visit Brazil to see what they were doing, and this was the new areas around Brasilia, because the country had expanded. They went into the places where there had been no cities, and they were building cities, and they needed priests. But importing priests isn't always the answer. So they need to deal with the people that are there, with the indigenous culture, and with the leadership that's there, because they will not accept somebody else unless that person really is part of their culture. So the idea of the bishops, and they're proposing it, that they would make ministers of these indigenous people. Probably not all at once, because certainly they can be catechists, maybe they can be ordained deacons, and maybe even priests. Now the issue is maybe they have to be married. It's a different culture, it's a different place. It's not something that celibacy probably wouldn't work there. And as in Eastern Europe, we have the Eastern Catholic churches, and this was a different culture in a different way. So the point is that this is what they're asking, and it seems that if they ask and they are in agreement, the Holy Father may grant that privilege to them to do that.
So all the headlines say married priest, but we're only talking about in Amazonia. We're not talking about a universal rule, right?
That's the issue. That may expand, you never know, but that's the focus. If you're going to evangelize these people, we need ministers to do it. And then they talked about having women in places of providence and leadership, which is always the case there. And it's a frontier, basically. It's really a frontier. And so you have to have new methods to deal with it.
Yeah. One of the things they talked about with these married priests, they would ordain like specific men who are kind of like leaders of the groups, right?
But I think that they're just not going to pick people up. They have to be trained.
Yeah.
They have to understand the faith. They have to understand the liturgy, etc. So I think people are jumping ahead a lot. You're just going to say, oh, you're a leader, well, we're going to ordain you a priest.
But you'd have
That's
to
not gonna
adapt.
be.
It's not going to be the same seminary training as, say, we get here at Dunwoody.
No,
You'd
it
have to
wouldn't be.
adapt it to
No,
the
it
circumstances.
it wouldn't be that, no. It would be different, and then it's a different approach, yes.
Does that lead to watering down the role of the priest at all? Or?
No, not really. Again, it's a specific culture and limits. I mean, you're talking about people that are semi-literate, people that the languages are indigenous languages, so it's very different. You can't have in those circumstances something that doesn't fit at all. It's something way above what they can understand, so it has to be adapted.
Great. Bishop, thanks for being with
You're
us.
welcome.
And we'll certainly be watching the Synod, which is, I believe, in October, November.
Okay.
Okay, back to our news desk.
Thank you, Ed and Bishop DiMarzio. The Synod will begin at the Vatican on October 8th and run for 3 weeks. Still to come on Current News, New York Cardinal Timothy Dolan captured in a portrait that was a long-time work of love, one of the special stories we're taking another look at. And the tablet has a brand new page called Our Diocesan Family, where you can share your pictures of recent baptisms, Holy Communions, confirmations, marriage, all of the joyous sacraments. For more details and to submit your photos, go to thetablet.org/ourdiocesanfamily. Your picture may be published in an upcoming issue of the newspaper. We'll be right back. Welcome back as we take another look at memorable stories reported by the Current News team. The portrait is now done after years of hard work, an image of New York Cardinal Timothy Dolan that has been publicly displayed. Emily Druby is here again to report that the art comes from the close links between the painter and the Cardinal.
Artist Richard Hearns' beautiful pieces fill the walls of the Sheen Center, but one standout piece commands the room. The new official portrait of Cardinal Timothy Dolan, the piece born through mutual friends.
We have a very long family connection.
Hearns grew up Catholic. His godmother, Sister Rosario Delaney, was Cardinal Dolan's grade school principal, and family friend Sister Bosco Daly, the Cardinal's teacher.
We both had this very positive influence from these same two women all our lives. So that's really the bridge that connects myself and the Cardinal.
But now another bridge connects the two, this artwork. Over the years, Hearns and Cardinal Dolan have met both in New York City and in Ireland, where Hearns lives. The idea for the portrait came from these get-togethers. Hearns is primarily an abstract painter, so painting a portrait was a challenge, one he was thrilled to take on.
I went to great lengths. I pored over books. I talked to anybody I knew who was involved in portraiture. I visited museums.
His hard work paid off.
That painting was in my studio for over 3 years and nobody really got to see it. So now to have other people engage with the painting, I can't put it into words really, it means a great deal to me.
The portrait and other pieces from his still life collection on display at the Sheen Center for all to enjoy.
I love the way he's captured the Archbishop here. It's almost like I feel like I know him.
Of course, people can't take home the main portrait, but they do have these little individual mini portraits that people can take home. Some of them will even be signed by the artist. In NoHo, Emily Druby, Current News.
The portrait is now hanging in the Cardinal's residence next to St. Patrick's Cathedral. That is Current News. I'm Michelle Powers. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.